What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I am leaving a day early to head out to Latrobe to check out Steelers training camp, which I am very, very excited about. But I didn't want to leave you guys hanging without a video before I left. I want to talk through some wide receiver trade options for Pittsburgh. Some of these guys, you're going to be more familiar with than others. This has been a huge topic of discussion really over the past, 3, 4 months or so. But I think it's particularly relevant now with the state of the receiver room, now that we've gotten into training camp. But especially now that we know, Roman Wilson, third round pick, is going to unfortunately miss a couple weeks with an ankle injury. He's supposed to be back before the start of the regular season. But, I'm going to talk through some hypotheticals with these guys, what these guys bring to the table, some background information, and what it would theoretically look like in terms of what it would cost to acquire those players. So before we get started, please make sure that you like the video, subscribe, drop me a comment. All that stuff is greatly appreciated. Also, shout out to all the members that have joined the channel over the past several days. I dropped an hour-long Justin Fields film room, having a really good week at training camp. So there's an hour-long film room over there. So that is readily available for you guys as soon as you sign up, if that's something you're particularly interested in. So kind of to start this discussion off, I wanted to go ahead and eliminate some of the popular names that in my eyes are no longer realistic or even, necessarily attainable. Cortland Sutton, Denver Broncos, got a bump in his contract. Don't think he's really available anymore. Darius Slayton, guy from the Giants, who's had a sneaky good career, but the Giants took care of him from a financial perspective as well. At Steelers now, between myself, Allen, Smitty, all those guys, we've told you guys all summer that they've acquired about pretty much any receiver who is potentially even on the market. Guys like Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel around draft time. None of those things ever really materialized beyond just curiosity and them just expressing interest. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about Brandon Ayuk, but even as far-fetched as I think that trade is, I haven't talked about him much on the channel, so I just wanted to give you all some brief thoughts before we get into some of the more realistic possibilities, in my opinion. But Ayuk, I've wrote about him for Steelers Now, did a really deep dive back in March, when these rumblings started kind of taking place. But 26 years old, 6 foot, 205 pounds, coming off a 1,300 yards, 7 touchdown season. He was over 3 yards per route run last year. He ranked third in the NFL behind Tyreek Hill, Nico Collins. Elite separator, wins at all 3 levels, defeats press with ease, like true X receiver. He plays the most difficult receiver position that there is. He performs incredibly well. He's gotten better and better each and every season. He's entering the 5th-year option. Even after requesting a trade, I don't think he actually gets dealt from San Francisco because they're in the midst of a Super Bowl window. I would be absolutely stunned if they traded because I just don't think they should. Still, he's probably worth mentioning just because he's the one guy that's kind of been thrown around that hasn't been taken care of from a financial perspective. With all these other receivers getting paid, San Francisco's been reluctant to do that. But I do think it's more likely that they keep him and Deebo go into this season, play things out, and then they decide which of those receivers they want to keep as they head into next year. So now let's get into some more realistic options, some guys that I actually think could be potential trade targets for the Steelers. The name I kind of want to start off with is Treylon Burks from Tennessee. A little bit of background information on Burks: 6'2", 225 pounds, still just 24 years old. He was the 18th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft. He was in that now infamous A.J. Brown deal, which got a couple people fired over there in the Titans organization. But coming out of Arkansas, he 1,100-yard guy, double-digit touchdowns during his final season playing in the SEC. Since coming into the NFL, things haven't been all that great, with the exception of some flashes down the stretch of his rookie campaign, still with some injuries, some other things. But some things I liked about Burks coming out of college, I went back and looked at my scouting report on him. Size, tracking ability, good body control, very comfortable catching passes away from his frame, has really nice length for the position. He kind of played as a power slot in college, lots of design touches to get him the ball in space, take advantage of his vision as a yak threat. Still a developing route runner who is also learning how to take care of his body at the professional level. I think there's been some stuff coming out about his conditioning levels and what his body looks like. Apparently that's better now, but that's just part of becoming a pro. There's more emphasis on that sort of thing because you're not just going to be able to out-talent everybody. With the Titans adding Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd in free agency this year, they spent a lot of money to upgrade that position, give Will Levis some legitimate weapons on the outside, along with a brand new front office coaching staff combo. I think it's very possible that he could be had via trade. Anytime a new regime kind of steps into place and there's an underperforming early round draft pick, I always think they don't have the same amount of connection to that player player as if they would if, they were actually the regime that selected him in the draft. So 2 more years on his rookie deal, but they are fully guaranteed. I think that's worth mentioning because they're a little bit higher because he is a first round pick, but he could probably be had for some sort of conditional mid round pick. He's a semi intriguing dart throw for me, so long as the Steelers use him either as a flanker or power slot rather than a true X receiver, which proved to be a pretty difficult transition for him, which is something that I expected. I anticipate that I was probably going to be wrong on Burks coming out of college. I was going to be too high on him just because the Titans were almost trying to make him into an AJ Brown clone, and he just really wasn't that. But yeah, intriguing dart throw, somebody that I definitely think could be had, considering where he's at on the depth chart, and where Tennessee's at as a franchise. Um, I do want to talk about one of my favorite players, and you guys have heard this name before on the channel if you followed me during the free agency period, but Noah Brown, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. Little bit of background information on Brown if you're not familiar: 6'2", 222 pounds, another big receiver. He's 28 years old. He's coming off a career season, nearly 600 receiving yards, despite missing 7 games. He was very productive last year. He was actually 4th in the NFL last year in yards per catch at 17.2. He was on my free agency wish list before ultimately ending up back in Houston. To me, Brown is kind of the ideal wide receiver 3 type, somebody that you really want on your team. He's a highly competitive player who can play inside and outside. Created a ton of explosive plays last year down the field on deep crossing routes off play action and Bobby Slowick's system. Beyond the explosive play rate, which is really impressive, Brown has really good spatial awareness. I feel like he's a really quarterback-friendly target, understands how to sit in soft spots and zone coverage. It's rare to see a guy sign a 1-year contract and then get traded months later, but I also think that Houston's in a relatively unique situation because I don't know if they anticipated a guy like Stephon Diggs being available to them and that Diggs would want to come to Houston to play. But if you look at that receiver room, man, like Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, those are 3 extremely good receivers. They're also not a super pass heavy offense. Maybe that improves this year with CJ Stroud. But there's not a lot of touches to go around. So maybe there's a situation where he's the odd man out in that situation. But, Brown's physicality is really what Arthur Smith likes on the perimeter. And, which could also allow them to kind of bring guys like Calvin Austin, like Roman Wilson along at a more reasonable rate rather than forcing them into roles that they probably aren't ready for in terms of having to share, a significant snap share really out of the gate. So, sticking with the theme, I kind of want to talk about really the rest of the depth chart for the Houston Texans because of those 3 guys I mentioned. If you just look at the depth, like top to bottom, it's one of, if not the most talented wide receiver room in the entire league. Another name I wanted to mention is former Alabama wide receiver John Mechie. He's 5'11", 187 pounds. He just turned 24 years old. He's a second-round pick a couple years ago after breaking out at Alabama. Unfortunately, he had a really rough string of luck. Suffered an ACL injury late during his final season in college. He was also diagnosed, I believe, with leukemia right after being drafted, so he missed his entire rookie season. He returned last year, played sparingly in a reserve role, some flashes there on really limited playing time. But I was admittedly a little bit lower on Mechie than the consensus coming out, but I did think that he was a very detailed player who was going to be a productive pro. And he was going to be able to contribute pretty early thanks to his detail as a route runner. He understands how to get defenders off balance. He attacks leverage really well. I think he's really smooth getting in and out of his breaks. I was very impressed with his blocking, particularly last year against the Steelers. I remember being just blown away by the effort of the Texas receiver room. But he had a really nice block on Cole Holcomb. I think they were running a little toss crack to the outside to the left, and he got latched on to Holcomb and ended up pancaking him to the ground, got up, flexed on him. It's a pretty cool highlight. Not something I really love seeing as someone who covers the Steelers, but, this dude's a really gritty player. I think he's just an all right athlete. So I don't think he's got a super high ceiling or is probably going to be anything more than like a wide receiver 3 at the NFL level, but he's a dirty work kind of player. And I think he can really thrive in a kind of utility role. He has 2 really cheap cost controls years left on his rookie deal. So that makes him somewhat intriguing to me. Like I said, really not sure about how the depth chart's going to play out. You look at these guys, another guy that I'm about to mention, it's really going to come down to like which one of these guys do they think has the most upside? Are they looking for upside? Are they looking for veteran experience? How special teams contributions play into this discussion? But I do think that Mechie's somebody that they should at least inquire about as a potential option as we get closer to the regular season. Another name, probably one that y'all are familiar with, definitely not from his days in Houston, but Robert Woods, aka Bobby Trees, 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's 32 years old now. It's crazy. He's been around that long. I remember watching Woods, studying him coming out of USC. So it's wild that he's been around this while. But proven veteran. He's a pros pro, accumulated over 8,000 yards in his career. He's always kind of split his time playing inside out, some in a power slot role, but he's played some as a flanker as well. It's fair to acknowledge that he's on the downswing of his career, but I still do think he's still playable in a depth role as long as you're not anticipating him going out there and playing like 100% of snaps or something like that, or commanding a heavy target share in a passing game. If you're wondering why all of the Texans receivers, including John Mechie, Noah Brown, even their starters like Tank Dell, who's like a $150 soaking wet, and Nico Collins, if you're wondering why all those guys block with incredible effort, look no further than Robert Woods. I mean, this dude has always been one of the NFL's best in that category. Super physical. His demeanor really matches what the Steelers coaching staff with the new wide receivers coach Zach Azzani and Arthur Smith really love and look for at that position. At his peak, he was kind of this jack of all trades type of receiver without any really overwhelmingly glaring weaknesses, but he also never really had like a trump card too. He was tough as nails over the middle, really efficient route runner, I should say, despite being a somewhat limited athlete. He has good size. He's a smooth mover, but not overly explosive. Last year, when I was studying like the Texans offense leading up to the Steelers game, they were even lining him up on some choice routes out of the backfield, trying to get him some favorable matchups against linebackers working over the middle of the field. I think that his $6 million salary is definitely rich for what he is as a player right now. And that's something that would need to be worked out in order to facilitate a trade. But I'd be in favor of at least asking about it, depending on like what the cost is. I think he's going to be extremely cheap to acquire. I don't know if the Texans are going to go with a huge like youth movement there down south, or if they're going to try to keep him. But I think even beyond like him being a utility player at this stage in his career, I think like the veteran presence, the Steelers don't really have like that old wily veteran. I think the Steelers really probably wanted to bring back Allen Robinson, even if it didn't make a ton of sense. I think Woods has a little bit more left in the tank than that, but kind of a similar idea that you get from having a guy who's been a really productive pro. He knows how to do things the right way. He can be a good teacher, a good leader for the younger guys in the room. And if he's going to be essentially free or something like that for a late pick or something like that, I wouldn't balk at that idea either. So. Next name I want to talk about now that we're done with the Texas wide receiver room, I wanted to talk about a name that I haven't seen thrown out a ton, but I think that is at least worth mentioning, is a guy like Tim Patrick from the Denver Broncos. 6'4", 210 pounds. He's going to be entering his age 30 season, I believe. This isn't a name that's been thrown out very much, but I do think it's worth mentioning just because his breakout as a pro actually happened when Azzani was his wide receivers coach at Denver. So he referred to Patrick as Freddy Krueger. I was looking up some quotes and just like what he had to say about him as a player, as a teammate. He referred to him as Freddy Krueger because you just couldn't kill him. He was oft injured. Denver brought in other receivers. They drafted guys, but Patrick continued to get better and better, carved out a role for himself, really overcame the odds as a guy that, wasn't drafted coming out of college. Azzani really credited his toughness throughout when he was his coach. Primarily an outside receiver, but when I went back and watched some, 2020, 2021 catches and stuff like that, one of the things that I really love was like his hand usage to get guys off his frame. He's a bigger guy, understands the art of late separation, how to use like subtle, like kind of push offs and shield defenders away using his body, late hands at the catch point, late in the rep. Back-to-back productive campaigns, 2020, 2021. He got a really nice contract extension. I think it was like 3 years, $30 million, which at that time was a really nice deal. Unfortunately, and this is probably why he hasn't been mentioned a ton, he's coming off back-to-back injury-filled seasons, hasn't played a snap since 2021. I think he tore his ACL and then tore his Achilles. That's tough. I mean, Patrick was a guy, one of the reasons why he went undrafted was because he had some injury concerns coming out of college. Denver did rework his deal down to, I think, around the minimum base salary, but they also drafted Troy Franklin. They've got 3 other receivers probably ahead of him on the depth chart at this point, a guy like Marvin Mims, who they drafted last year. Steelers wide receiver coach, he said, it's no secret that I love big receivers. The Steelers have a lot of smaller receivers on the roster right now. You look at Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, guys like that. If they want, if you notice the guys that I mentioned so far are all guys that have decent size because I think really the more the priority should be adding a guy that can play outside, and Patrick can do that. I would imagine that he would be pretty cheap if both sides decide it's best for a fresh start. But one guy who's not overly big, but is someone that I wanted to mention kind of as I round out this list before getting into some guys that they could even pick up on the free agent wires. A guy like Scott Moore coming out of Kansas City. 5'9", 195 pounds. He ran a blazing 4.4 40-yard dash, incredible 1.46 10-yard split. Second round pick 2 years ago. He was actually drafted above George Pickens, which I was surprised of once the draft rolled around. But he's a local kid. Given the massive jump of competition from his days in college, I believe he's from Western Michigan. He really struggled out of the gate. Andy Reid's system, a little bit difficult to pick up from a terminology standpoint. He saw his playing time diminish last season, falling out of favor, got banged up a little bit as well. In college, we actually saw Moore play quite a bit on the outside, even though he was about 5'9". I was actually really impressed with his ability to win versus press coverage. Consistently had a plan when guys tried to crowd his space at the line of scrimmage, despite his size deficiencies on the boundary. Killer on in breaking routes such as slants, strong frame, some suddenness to his game as a route runner as well. I think he has pretty good footwork as well. But with the Chiefs drafting, Xavier Worthy, they signed Hollywood Brown, got Rashee Rice, some other guys. Of course, Travis Kelce is still there too. I think their starters are really set. I'm not sure that Moore is going to make the roster without a very strong finish to the summer, but could be an intriguing buy low option. He's probably not going to cost more than a day 3 pick, but someone that I would at least, ask about. I think they also had an informal meeting with him at the combine, if I remember correctly. So, two other guys I think are worth mentioning, not necessarily as trade candidates, because I wouldn't be willing to give up draft capital for these players, I don't think, but more so as guys they could sign, after the final cut downs, take place. Or Justin Ross, also from the Kansas City Chiefs, buried on the depth chart. Not something that I'm necessarily advocating for, especially since he got into some legal trouble last season. But the Steelers were really, really interested in him through the draft process, despite some health concerns. But their wide receiver coach at the time, Frisman Jackson, actually, put him through his workout, his pro day at Clemson. Super talented, really good mover for his size, can really sink his hips and drive back to the football. Kind of more of an X profile, I would say, but I don't think he's going to make the final 53 in Kansas City. It would shock me to see them put in some type of waiver claim there. We talked about Brandon Ayuk at the beginning of the video. San Fran, they drafted 2 other receivers, my guy Ricky Pearsall. They also drafted Jacob Cowing out of Arizona. You just look at the weapons that they got over there. They're pretty loaded. San Francisco's got one of the best rosters in the league, top to bottom, especially at the playmaker spots. But he's another guy on the outside looking in. Is kind of Danny Gray out of SMU. Speedster. He can really burn it down the field. A lot of explosive plays on his tape in college. Pittsburgh was also really interested in him throughout that process. I believe he had a formal meeting at the combine with the Steelers, but they also sent Frisman Jackson to work him out at his pro day. So there was definitely some interest there. I would be absolutely floored if he made the roster. He's barely played through 2 seasons. I don't even think he registered a snap last year. He was on the practice squad or inactive all season. So, a potential practice squad stash there would probably make some level of sense. But that's pretty much it. I mean, for the most part, I'm still of the opinion that the Steelers absolutely need to add a receiver to the room, like regardless, add some sort of talent, take another dart throw, something like that. And I'm pretty confident that there's going to be an addition. I just don't know where the addition is going to come from, and it's probably not going to be the player that everybody's expecting or everybody's like wanting it to be. But I do think they would be smart to, add talent, take some more shots at the position. Someone I think that makes the 53-man roster isn't currently on the Steelers roster right now, and I think that that's still something I'm betting pretty heavily on. But I really appreciate you guys tapping in with me. Like I said, I'll be dropping a lot of content, maybe going live to break down what I see once I get to training camp. Headed out tonight, so lots of content coming your way, both on here and on the site at SteelersNow.com. Really look forward to getting that to you all. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Peace and love.